What three EQs do you use in every mix? And there are three that I use every mix, and pretty much every bus I will use these three EQs. And the three EQs that I use they're all very different from each other. They all have their own unique qualities. So EQ1 is the obvious. It's FabFilter Pro Q3. Now I use FabFilter Pro Q3 as an overall EQ that can surgically do everything. That's the great thing about Pro Q3, is it does everything. Dynamic EQ, EQ on the left, EQ right, stereo EQ, mid-side, does everything. It isn't the greatest sounding EQ, but it is the most precise in the sense that it's just a digital EQ that is very precise in what you want to do. Roll-offs, it is brilliant for taking some of the top end out. It's brilliant for all those sorts of things. Now I use it at the end of the chain, and the reason I use it at the end of the chain is I will use it mainly to take out any low ends that I don't want, take out any frequencies that I don't want in the song, in that stem. I can remove them, process or do all my processing, and I'll use it at the very end of the chain to remove anything. I also have the spectrum analyzer built into it. At the end of the chain, I can reference exactly what the audio looks like on a spectrum analyzer using the Pro Q3. So that is one reason why I use the Pro Q3. The other EQ that I use is the Elysia Muse EQ. Now I use the Muse EQ mainly because I love the hardware. I love how the hardware sounds, and the hardware sounds unbelievable. I did a demo review, A/B, between the hardware and the software, and there was minimal differences. So much so that you could probably, I mean, we set up the EQ plug-in versus hardware exactly the same, but there was a minimal difference, but you could probably tweak the plug-in to sound more like the hardware, give it a little bit more in the bottom and a little bit more detail in the top. It's a 5-band EQ, mid-side. It's brilliant, and it's really perfectly controlled on the Avid S4. But the reason I use it a lot is because it is so accurate to the hardware. And any plugin that emulates great sounding hardware that well is a great plugin, and I know it so well because I use the hardware so much. So that's one reason that I use the Muse EQ, because it is just a great EQ, and it's one of those EQs. I always say it's very round. It's a very round sounding EQ. It's not going to be your surgical EQ. It's never going to be something like that. You're going to use the Pro Q3 for things like that. But in terms of, I use it very much if I need to warm something up in terms of thicken up the bottom end, give it a bit more in the bottom end, brighten up the sides, for instance, in the highs, things like that. I can really get some great sound from that EQ, and that's one EQ that I really do love. The next EQ is something rather unique, and that is the Eventide Split EQ. Now, it's not your conventional EQ. It's kind of like Dynamics meets EQ. So you can pull out Dynamics using it, and then it's kind of one of them ones where what it's great for is if for instance, you've got a kick. Now, if you've got a kick and you want to get that low end of the kick thumping, you can pull the Dynamics out on the low end, and then just drop the gain on the on that same band, so that you're pulling it out with the Dynamics, but then so it's not getting too overpowering, you're reducing the volume slightly, and it works really good on the low end. And also in the highs, when you want that kind of, say you got a hi-hat or something and you want that tick 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 type sound, and you want to click that hi-hat, you really want to get it kind of clicking, you can do that to great effect with the high band on the Split EQ. Pull out the Dynamics, and you'll get that faster, kind of more sharper hit. But then because that gets a bit harsh and because that gets a bit too much, you then can bring the gain down, like you would in an EQ. Bring that down, and then it doesn't, what it does is it doesn't then sound harsh. It sounds perfect, but with this really lovely attack to the hit. So that's a really good EQ. So my three would be FabFilter Pro Q3, Elysium Muse EQ, and lastly Eventide Split EQ. Now, like I said at the start, those three, all three, very unique from each other. They all have their own specific purpose, and that's why they are my three plugins that I will use every single mix. I will use all of them. I will use I will basically have those three EQs on the majority of my buses.